evening. Welcome to tonight's program. It's good to see everyone here. I know that in addition to students, faculty, and staff from the University of Richmond, there's probably some people from the larger Richmond community, and we want to welcome you to the University of Richmond. My name is Juliet Landfair. I'm the Assistant Director of the Women Involved in Living and Learning program, the WIL program here at the university. As you may or may not know, Amy Sonnie's talk is part of a series organized by the Women's Studies program and the WIL program here at the university. It's part of a larger series called Building a Better World, Women and Men Organizing for Social Justice. Our next program is going to take place in a few weeks on Monday, October 3rd with Lonnie Guinier, who's a law professor and civil rights activist. Her name may be familiar to some of you. And we have a kind of a flyer with the different speakers coming as part of our series available by the door. So we encourage you to pick one up. Well, to begin with, we have a lot of people to thank for sponsoring our whole series, but I want to particularly thank for this program Safe Zone and the student group New Directions here at the university for working to promote sexual diversity here. And particularly Lee Hawthorne, who's a coordinator of student life, has been really integral to sort of promoting sexual diversity here, and we want to thank her, as well as some students who've been integrally involved with the formation and the direction of New Directions, particularly Walter Cook and Muhammad Abu Zaid and Laura Haddad and Jane Hodge. So we want to thank you in particular for your involvement. I also wanted to tell you all that Amy Sonnie's book, Revolutionary Voices, she will have for sale after the program, and they are actually, for part of her, she's going to be embarking on a tour after this, kind of an organizing tour of all these big cities, and the sales from this book is partly going to be used to fund that. So I encourage you to buy some after the program. Now I'd like to pass the baton on to our WIL student, the WIL student who will be introducing Ms. Sonnie. Regina Coles is a sophomore here at the university. She is a psychology major and a women's studies minor. When I asked her where she was from, she hesitated, as only those from military families tend to do, and say, well, I don't know, all over. I know, and that's when you, military, right? So anyway, we're very fortunate to have her as a member of the WIL program, and I'd like to welcome her to introduce Ms. Sonnie. Regina Coles.
Well, I do have to start off saying that we are very excited because this is the 20th year of existence of both the WIL and the Women's Studies programs here at the University of Richmond. So we have a particular good reason to celebrate Ms. Sonnie's visit here tonight. Amy Lynn Sonnie is a 24-year-old writer, editor, and community activist committed to creating a forum for queer youth to speak out. She is a 1998 graduate of Syracuse University, where she received a Bachelors of Arts in Women's Studies and Magazine Publishing. Sonnie has given lectures and performances on topics ranging from racial and economic justice to community building to women in struggle. She has helped organize Take Back the Night Walks, was a young, loud, and proud youth conference volunteer, and participated in the Roe v. Wade commemoration events that celebrated 3 decades of freedom of choice. Currently, Sonnie is committed to Resist, an organization that she co-founded with Y.K. Hong. Resist is a political and cultural education resource for queer activists and educators, particularly young women, youth of color, working class youth, and other young people from marginalized communities. Together with other youth, she's working to build a movement of youth united for radical social change. She has also edited a book that was published this year entitled Revolutionary Voices. Revolutionary Voices is an anthology by and for queer youth. It is a forum for queer youth to speak out for and about their experiences, ideas, struggles, visions, all of the like. It includes poetry, prose, essays, artwork, and interviews. It explores how race, class, ability, age, religion, and culture intersect with gender, sexuality, and sex. Revolutionary Voices also features work by youth who struggle daily for social change and social justice. It is very important that we could have Amy Sonnie here tonight because she is an activist in our peer group, and she is making time to help others gain voices. Her work with queer youth activism has helped many. As many of you already know, this is a very conservative campus. Many in the queer community on this campus choose not to speak up and speak out for fear of rejection or isolation. This should not be the case. All groups, whether they pertain to gender, sexuality, race, or religion, should be able to voice their opinions, be open, and not have to continually face ignorance or hate. The queer community, slowly but surely, are pushing for mainstream acceptance through organizations like New Directions and Safe Zone. But until people on this campus, like myself, and members of the audience tonight, decide to speak up, this conservative ignorance will continue to remain intact. And on that note, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to everyone Amy Lynn Sonnie.
Wow, I really couldn't have asked. Can you all hear me? Yeah. I couldn't have asked for a better introduction. Thank you so much, Regina, and thank you all for coming tonight. I want to thank the WIL program especially for bringing me here. I'm really, really honored to be here and really excited about talking to you tonight, but more importantly, about dialoguing. I'm going to start off with a poem and then talk for just a little bit, and I think that the most important thing that we can do here tonight is talk to each other. So I really encourage you to ask questions, whatever questions. I've gotten a lot of feedback from the students here about what's going on campus, what's not going on campus, and what really, the work that really needs to be done. So I really value the time for dialogue after this, and I know that after we talk here, we're also going to be having a fireside chat over at the deanery. So I want to invite you all in advance to come over to that. So I'm going to start off with a poem that I wrote that's actually in Revolutionary Voices. I wasn't going to put it in there because I felt like there was already so much of me in the heart of this book. But I feel like it's an important poem. It's written in honor of my friend. It's called Halloween 1997 for Malachi. They made you watch while they did it, so you'd never forget, her eyes glassy with fear, searching your face for recognition as 5 fists rain on her. 2 guys hold you back, saying, "Watch, Butch, watch. Aren't you supposed to save her?" And after the thunder of laughter, the blood-stained concrete, the snap of bones and pride, you couldn't bring yourself to look at her, couldn't live with yourself reflected, helpless and beaten in her eyes. But I want to tell you that you're strong, that I see you walking those same streets 1 year later, wearing the same clothes, holding your head high, in order to say, I have survived. 2 years on the streets and I have survived. Deprogramming camp for queers and I have survived. 18 years, gang wars and ridicule, my father's fists, my mother's scorn, and I have survived, have saved myself, time and again, in order to say I own myself, and no fist can pound that out of me. Earlier this week, as I packed my belongings to come here and getting ready for the trip that I'm about to go on, packing up my room so a subletter could move in and help me pay my rent, I found a lot of old photos, a lot of old memorabilia, among which was some memorabilia I gathered at the Holocaust Museum in DC during a trip in May. While I was reflecting on that experience and what that meant to me and how powerful that was, I kept thinking of a quote that I hear time and again, that you see on postcards and you see on t-shirts and sometimes on posters, by a pastor named Martin Niemöller, who was a Holocaust survivor. And it kept coming to me when I was thinking of how I would talk to you tonight about the importance of being allies, about the importance of coalition building, about the importance of supporting one another and struggling for social change. So I wanted to read that to you tonight. It'll probably be familiar to some of you. First, they came for the communists, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a communist. Then they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a Jew. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a trade unionist. Then they came for the Catholics, and I didn't speak up because I was Protestant. Then they came for me, and by that time, no one was left to speak up. When I think about this, I really think about how his words capture the human tendency to deny injustice until it's standing at our front door, until it's in our face. It's the ideology of individualism that allows us to excuse ourselves from the responsibility for combating that injustice, and to deny its impact on other people's lives. When we do not act against injustice, we are acting for it. When we do not speak out about it, we are supporting it. And when we remain silent, we are complicit. For many of us, we cannot turn our heads away from injustice because it actively seeks us out. For women, for queer and transgender people, for youth of color, from all different cultures, for the poor, the differently abled, for youth and seniors, for immigrants to our country, facing the many manifestations of oppression is a daily event. I speak to you today as a young bisexual woman, as a white anti-racist person, as a person from a lower middle class family in Pennsylvania, as a poet and a writer, as a feminist, as an activist who believes that no one is free until all people are free. This is my lifelong commitment, to work for justice, not just for queers because I am queer, not just for women because I am a woman, but for everyone because all forms of hatred and fear share the same root. This is not something I always knew, though. There was definitely a time when I was oblivious to the impact of certain forms of oppression. When they didn't knock at my door, I wasn't aware of it. But when I came out at 15 years old, I understood that I needed to come out against all forms of injustice, not just injustice against queer people because I had reconciled that I was a young bisexual woman, but injustice against all people. So I came out against all forms of oppression. I began to understand that in the words of AIDS activist group ACT UP, silence equals death. But I've been lucky, and in the work that I do as an activist for social justice, I largely work with queer youth and other young people from oppressed communities who have not been so lucky. In a world that tells you that who you are is wrong, we internalize so much shame and silence, and it is often lethal. For queer youth, we account for the highest number of teen suicides and for an increased risk of drug abuse, depression, and homelessness. I know queer youth who are living on the streets now because they were being sexually and emotionally abused at home, who ran away because they feared for their lives, who were kicked out for being queer, who escaped mental health institutions where they were drugged and given electroshock therapy, who dropped out of school because their classmates ridiculed them. And if we don't speak up on their behalf, who will? In New York last spring, a 19-year-old African-American queer man named Steen Feinrich was brutally murdered by his white stepfather. Steen's remains were found in a plastic tub in a Long Island park. Among his remains were Steen's skull, with the words "Gay Nigger #1" carved on the skull. It makes me weepy even just to think about it. It's absolutely atrocious. In Chicago this summer, 2 police officers beat and raped Freddie Mason Jr., a gay man of color, while taunting him with racial and homophobic epithets. In San Francisco last spring, a queer homeless youth named Curtis died in his sleep of a heart attack induced by stress and a lack of medical attention. The city paper wouldn't print an obituary for him because he was just one of many dead homeless people the city does not care enough to account for. When they came for them, who was there to speak up? The connections between racism and homophobia, classism and sexism are glaring to me. To me, these events tell the tale of whose lives are valued in our society and whose lives are not. As a young queer African-American man, Steen was likely facing internalized self-hatred, exile from his family and community, harassment in school, and discrimination on a daily basis before being murdered by the racist and homophobic hatred of his own family member. He never even had the opportunity to find what it is what we have to celebrate as queer people, to find out that there are other young queer people like himself, to find out that there are communities in celebration of the culture of the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community. But sadly, these incidents are not rare, and they often are not spoken about. These examples of injustice often don't make the evening news, and the responsibility for telling these stories lies with us. We live under a system that privileges some of us at the expense of others. Our society is a white supremacist society, granting privilege to white people at the expense of people of color. It is patriarchal, granting privilege to men at the expense of women. It is heterosexist, granting privilege to straight people at the expense of queer people. And it is capitalist, granting privilege to the rich at the expense of the poor. But our identities are complex, so how do we reconcile this? As a young queer woman from a middle-class background, I am both privileged and attacked. I am both marginalized and centralized. I'm even here today because of this complex interplay between identities. I was invited here as a young queer social justice activist who has had the privilege to complete a 4-year degree, the privilege to travel, the privilege to be published, the privilege to speak, and the white skin privilege and class privilege that it takes to be listened to. Understanding this is the first role of an ally. We must be able to look inside of our privileges in order to understand that the systems of oppression that make privilege and oppression two sides of the same coin. We must look inside of ourselves to the times when we have felt attacked, different, silenced, or appalled at injustice, and we must not turn our heads away from it. An ally is someone who is engaged in a lifelong struggle for justice for all people. An ally acts against discrimination. An ally speaks up and makes it known that injustice will not be tolerated. An ally is self-reflective and self-critical. An ally listens to the communities being affected and is respectful of what those communities want and need. I am both an ally and a queer feminist activist in need of my straight and male allies. The social justice work I do to mobilize queer youth for social change empowers young people, particularly those from marginalized communities, to act, to speak, to change the things that we see wrong with society. But it is also work that welcomes the support of straight folks, of adult allies, of people from other oppressed communities who see that we are engaged in a common struggle. Additionally, I was an activist on my college campus in Syracuse, New York, one of only a handful of students at first, but by the time I left, I was a part of a large student network of activists working on different issues. We supported each other, we built coalitions, we helped each other out. We focused on our own issues, but we always came back to working in solidarity. Currently, I'm involved in anti-racist education, in rape prevention work, in the fight against police brutality, and against the expansion of the prison system, because it is our folks who are being thrown in jail. Youth, people of color, queers, poor and working class people, people with mental and physical disabilities, and corporations are profiting from our imprisonment. I do all of this work and more because as a white queer feminist activist, I see that all of these struggles are connected. In the mid-1800s, many white feminists were engaged in the abolitionist movement because they saw a common fight for humanity in the struggle against slavery. Likewise, many abolitionists struggled for women's suffrage because they too knew the power of the vote and the politics of who was denied it. In the 1960s, student activists and civil rights leaders of all backgrounds banded together through organizations such as the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, Students for a Democratic Society, a mostly white student group working in solidarity with the civil rights movement, and the anti-war movement galvanized a generation around coalition politics. Organizations like the Black Panther Party, the Brown Berets, the Young Lords, and a group of poor whites from the South called the Young Patriots formed a rainbow coalition to resist racist violence, police brutality, and the oppression of all poor and working class people. And out of those movements for liberation and solidarity grew the Gay Liberation Front and many other queer organizations who stood up to be counted, who resisted police raids on queer bars, assault, and who countered the invisibility to create a culture of resistance. The current gains made by the feminist and queer movements could not have been made without the example and coalition politics of the civil rights and black liberation movements, or without the work of the many, many people who have spoken out and acted out against fascism in all of its forms. This is a history of resistance that I am proud of, and today we must continue to see that we have a common struggle. We must think of the issues that affect us all. For the LGBTQ movement, and when I say LGBTQ, I mean lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and questioning. This means that we must demand equal recognition as domestic partners or married couples under the law, but we must not see this victory for gay marriage as a means to an end. When we fight for gay marriage, or positive media coverage, or an end to police harassment of queer and transgender people, we are addressing the branches of a larger tree. These are necessary struggles, and social justice organizing must always work to meet people's needs. But we must also be clear that our goal is to uproot that tree, not to merely mend its branches or tend to its leaves. A movement for radical social change addresses the internalized, institutional, and interpersonal manifestations of oppression and seeks to root it out. And this means recognizing that a gain for one group is only a partial victory if other people are still denied their rights. Homosexuality is not a social disease. It is racism that is the disease. It is sexism that is the disease. It is heterosexism that is the disease. And inaction against these diseases is fatal. If you have a cure and do not use it, if you have a voice and do not raise it, the blood is on your hands. For the next Matthew Shepard, for the next Brandon Tina, the next James Byrd, a black man in Texas who was dragged behind a truck by 3 white men, for the next Steen Feinrich, Freddie Mason Jr., and all of those past. Across the world, people are organizing for social justice. Now, today, here and abroad, on your campus and on campuses across the United States. And these are not new struggles. Social justice was not invented in the 90s. It wasn't born at the Seattle protests against the World Trade Organization that many of you probably heard about or saw in the news. Surely recent atrocities and global exploitation and an increase in police misconduct have galvanized our struggle. But in the US and around the world, wherever there has been injustice, there has always been resistance. Right here on your campus, students are fighting against the exploitation of poor and third world workers in sweatshops. These are local struggles in a worldwide context where global capitalism and transnational corporations necessitate labor exploitation and ecological devastation in order to reap profits. On your campus, you have the opportunity to create a community of inclusion, a community of action against injustice, to organize a march against hate, to stand up and speak out as allies, to form coalitions between student groups, to make this a safe atmosphere for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender students to be visible. Because right now, it is not safe here, and this is your responsibility. It is not always safe for queer people to speak out. And it's not always safe for women to speak out against rape or sexual assault. But together, you can create a climate on your campus where it is safe because you have made yourself visible as an ally. You have created a supportive atmosphere. The first step is to find each other. The second, to speak out. And the third is to define the issues that you can come together around to build coalitions and strategize for action. And to think strategically about how to approach those issues because these are winnable battles. Maybe not on your campus at this moment, but at other campuses, the battles that you're fighting have already been won. Around the country, the battles that you're fighting have a history of resistance. And you are the agents in continuing that long history of resistance. By acting against injustice, you will never have to say that when they came for your friend, when they came for your neighbor, when they came for you, no one was there to speak up. My challenge to you as students, as activists, as allies, as friends, is to make demands, to use your voice, to question hateful social mandates and who it is that benefits from that oppression. Look inside your own privilege. Know that power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has, and it never will. And it does not take a mathematics major to figure out that those in power are outnumbered by those of us without it. But we must be committed to fighting together or else we don't have those numbers, to speaking up even when it is not our door that discrimination is knocking on, because we have no right to remain silent. So I wanted to give more time for us to sort of have a discussion and a dialogue. If people are sort of feeling intimidated by the microphone audience thing, we could sit in a circle, but let's open it up and see where it goes.